I'll just do a quick little intro, I guess, and then I'll have you introduce yourself to the people. Sound
Hell
good?
yeah.
All
Hmm.
right. Welcome back, everybody. My name is Lunar Lilith 28, and welcome back to another episode of Witch's Hour. As you can see, today I have a very special guest with me to talk about some of his experiences with the paranormal, etc. Just some other random stuff as well in this field. All of his information will be linked below, so please be sure to go check him out. Viking, would you like to do a little intro of yourself?
Hi, I'm Viking. I go by many names, and Viking is the one I go by the most on the interwebs. I am from the rural south of Louisiana, and for anybody who doesn't know where Louisiana is, it is the most haunted place on the planet, probably. I don't know. Um, and that's really like what that's really where that comes in. I play video games on the internet sometimes, and I talk a whole lot of mess. Am I allowed to curse in this?
Yeah, go for it.
I talk a lot of shit.
And that's why we're friends.
Yeah, that's what I do. That's what I do. So I'm
Sorry,
happy
I
to be
didn't.
here.
I started to like giggle a little bit at the most haunted place because every time I listen to a podcast about like haunted places, they're always like the most haunted place. I'm like, they can't all be the most haunted.
Uh, New Orleans is pretty much like just saturated in like voodoo heat. So
Right,
yeah,
right.
I think like if anywhere has the right to be like, I mean, it's probably New Orleans.
I believe
Let's
it.
be
I
honest.
believe it. Honestly, like New Orleans is the most believable that I've heard so far. So
It's like all we do is get drunk and like pray to weird gods here. It is what it is.
that's bound to create some sort of energy.
Yeah, so that's a really good way to describe it. Is some sort of energy.
Some sort of energy. I love it. Well,
Mm.
do you just want to talk about kind of your experience in the paranormal field and living in? You said you live in New Orleans, right?
So I live in New Orleans, but I actually grew up in the Bayou, about 45 minutes southwest of New Orleans.
Okay.
Uh, so and like the Bayou has like its own. I grew up in Cajun country, and like Cajuns are one of the most interesting little like we're technically an ethnic group, but it feels weird calling us an ethnic group because we're all white people. Um, but we're like a little group of it's they have their own sort of like take on everything, right? So there's actually like a Cajun werewolf called the Rougarou. Um,
I've heard of the Rougarou on
yeah,
Supernatural.
yeah. Well, and that's the thing, like the Rougarou, and like it's one of those like old wives' tales that was really never like every other folklore has been like written down and you can trace it, right? Like there's so many podcasts that like that's what they do, they trace folklore. The Rougarou is interesting because I grew up in that culture, and I've never ever once heard the same story twice about what the Rougarou actually is. Uh, And so like
Wow.
growing up in the bayou, like that's what your grandparents told you. It's like, you better behave yourself or the Ruger is gonna come take you out of your bed. And it's like, oh god, I don't want that. And like we also believe like your ancestors speak to you in Cajun culture a lot. So that was like a thing I grew up hearing is we make a joke that when you make Cajun food, you got to season it until your ancestors reach, grab your wrist, and say that's enough. Like stop doing that. You measure like everything Cajuns do, you measure that shit with your soul. Is like where it goes. And so growing up around that a lot, like you hear a lot about like you got papa is your papa, your grandpa, and then old papa is the ghost of your grandpa. Like that's if anybody says like, oh, my old papa, that means he's dead. And like you hear a lot about like if you misbehave, old papa's gonna come and put your toes in your sleep, and that's exactly what it sounds like. The
That's
ghost of
horrifying.
yeah, yeah, terrifying, right? Terrifying. I actually have an idea for a Cajun horror movie that I'll tell you about when we're off camera.
Heck yeah.
Because it's so funny. But no, you grow up in these cultures, and like they all have their own folklore, and Cajuns are still very simple rural like bayou people. A lot of them go fishing, a lot of them they live out in the country. I myself know people who are my age who I grew up with who didn't have the internet or TV until they were almost adults because that's just the part of the world they live in. They
Wow.
had electricity to like have air conditioning because you would like you would suffocate to death otherwise.
Right.
But and then the biggest bit of information that you really loved, um, I grew up around all of this with a Wiccan mother who
Heck
identifies as a witch.
yeah.
So, and that was always fun because that was the thing you did not talk about at school. Was I went to I went to like little frou frou private schools. I grew up pretty privileged until I was like in my early teens. But I went to like free little private schools, and it was always like, we don't talk about what mom does at home. You don't do it.
Right.
That was always that was always the big thing, like the big agreement you have with your parents. It's like, don't do it. Just don't do it. So, yeah.
Right. Do you think they did that like specifically to protect you because kids can be assholes for lack of a better phrase, and especially with things they don't understand? I feel like parents kind of teach children to fear the unknown. And so do you think that they asked you to not talk about it to kind of like not only protect their privacy obviously, but also protect you guys from, experiencing that, being bullied and etc.
Yeah, and I do think that that had a lot to do with it. Was that like, you can't, like, when you're a kid, you can't say that, like, oh, my mom's a witch. My mom like
Right.
talks about making voodoo dolls, and my mom talks about, like, having, like, she has like spirit familiars. My mom has always had like a pet bunny, and that was, we've always called that her familiar. Like, and
Oh.
it I thought it was a joke when I was a kid until I got older and realized, like, no, that's what it is. We celebrated Christmas much like many families would have, with the exception of, there were like a couple things we did at our house that when I'd mention at my friends' houses, they'd be like, we don't do that. And it was that on winter solstice, which is a week before my birthday, on winter solstice, we always got a present. And my mom
Oh.
would like let us, yeah. And it was not, it was like, no, this is just a present. Like, and it was like, oh, is this one of my Christmas presents? Like, no, it's not Christmas yet. And it was when I grew up and I realized, I was talking to my sister about it. I was like, we always got that on the winter solstice because, and she's like, yeah, dude, because our mom's a witch. Where have you been for 30 years?
Hello.
Oh, yeah, like my mom like celebrates the solstices and stuff, and uh, and so it was a lot of that, a lot of like, don't get bullied, but it was also that we grew up in this little small bayou community that
Right.
would have and my parents were like big players in this community. My parents were like very big figures in this, and so it was always like, we didn't want them to get ostracized. We didn't want them to get, like, it was going to be bad. It was going to be bad if, like, suddenly, like, my parents, who were the pillars of this community, like, people realized, like, oh yeah, she's into stuff we don't understand. And it was one of those kind of southern places where it's like,
Yeah.
people are afraid, much like how kids are afraid of things they don't understand. A lot of people in simple southern places are very afraid of what they don't understand.
For sure. I mean, I
Yeah.
think when I know we're getting off topic like just a little bit, but like I think that can carry into adulthood specifically, when people don't get out of that small town mindset. Like I came from a small town and I definitely had some problematic mindsets when,
Mm.
I was in a small town and I moved to the city and it was a culture shock that I definitely needed because things were not as I thought in my little small town. The world is so much bigger than that. So I
Yeah.
can completely relate and understand to that, of them wanting to not, be ostracized. I can't say that word, but you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
yeah. Also, what you were talking about with the Rougarou, I just that reminds me of the La Llorona, which
Oh
is
yeah.
a folklore I covered in a previous episode. But it was basically the same kind of thing where in Hispanic culture, they would tell their kids, like, you better behave or the La Llorona is going to come get you. And it just reminded me of that, like, how different cultures have different, like, urban legends that they use to scare their children into behaving.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's, yeah, and it they that, I think generations upon generations of people doing that has like become this thing where, like, that's how they communicate, like, it now, it just seems like that's how you communicate. It's just little like folklore you tell your kids to, like, calm them down or to whatever. And because it's funny, like, I think it doesn't seem funny to some of us, but I do think to our parents' generations it seems funny that, like, oh, we just scared the crap out of our kids with the Rougarou. It was great. It didn't
We'll
even.
just traumatize them.
Yeah, like, we'll just mildly traumatize our children. It's fine. And it, like, it was funny to them. But the real, like, you got to think that, like, 3 generations ago they believed that
Right.
that was what like that, and people still believe that, and like there's an element of the real to, like, all folklore. Everything is kind of like based in fact, right? Like, so,
Yeah.
um fear of the dark is fear of the unknown, because, like, your brain, if it can't comprehend something, goes, no, not at all. And H.P. Lovecraft actually made a whole genre of horror on that. Is like, it was horrifying to think that there were things you couldn't even look at or they would drive you insane. And, like, that's kind of what those folklore come from, is that, like, I saw an animal, or like I saw something that I didn't think was a thing in the world. I don't know how to comprehend that. I'm going to make stuff up about it. I'm going to make up my own little tale about it. um, and that's, I think, how a lot of that grows. uh, and it's really interesting growing up in a culture like that is still very rooted in these old world beliefs, because you see a lot of that shine through in ways that when you remind these people that's because of this, they don't want to hear it because they can't comprehend it, and it's a full circle.
Right.
Very full circle. Like modern folklore is like that, where modern folklore is old folklore, just full circle in a way that like we can't comprehend that back then that was truth, that was reality, and now,
Yes.
yeah, and that I think is a big thing about like all those old world cultures now.
100%. And I think that's really important to bring up too, because in a lot of these, specifically with like urban legends and things like that, I've done Wendigos, I've done Skinwalkers in the La Llorona, and in each one it is said that based off who you ask, the story changes a little bit. Not the basics of the story or the root of the story, but little details here and there change depending on who you ask. And I think that's because they do get passed down, like you were just talking about. They do get passed down from generation to generation,
Right.
and obviously it's like playing a giant game of telephone. Things are going to get lost in translation. Things are going to, you know, change as the story gets passed down. And, I think it's also important. You brought up how in the past certain aspects of that folklore was true. So
Yeah.
the Skinwalker specifically is one that sticks out to me. One, because it scares the crap out of me, and B, it is based heavily, and it is based off Native American culture, which I grew up with, because I am part Native American. So like growing up kind of with that, I also watched something horrible that I should not have watched on the Skinwalker, and that's part of the reason. But so there's this show called Lost Tapes, and they did an episode on Skinwalkers, and I watched it as a child. I did not go outside for 2 weeks. If it was dark, if the sun was
No.
setting, I refused. I refused to go outside for 2 weeks because it scared me so bad. So I actually did not want to do that episode. But when I started looking into the research, looking into the research and things, I kind of unearthed the fact to myself that story or the urban legend of the Skinwalker was born from such tragedy and like a very dark time in history. And I'm like, okay, I can see why and how this legend was kind of born out of this tragedy and things like that, especially when people kind of need somebody to blame,
Right.
and especially as white people get a hold of the story. When white people get a hold of the story and then they start kind of changing it to fit their narrative, and then they're whitewashing the actual history behind the Skinwalker, because not one thing that I've watched on the Skinwalker, except for Skinwalker Ranch a little bit, has truly covered the whole entirety of why that legend was born, and it's very tragic. But Skinwalker Ranch like brushed on it and then kind of skipped over it. So they definitely do get changed like through the generations, because it is a game of telephone. Also, whitewashing is a thing when you're talking Native American legends and things like that.
Yeah.
And just and there is fact behind them, and we weren't there. So like you were saying, to us in the modern time, it's like it's just an old urban legend, things like that. But back then, it very well could be real, and it could be real now.
Yeah. Well, and that's the like you mentioned the Wendigo, and it's interesting, right? Because like the Wendigo's an Algonquin legend, and I know a lot about the I love Wendigos. I think they're horrifying, but like they are. That's the scariest.
Same.
That is the single scariest urban legend like of all time. And like I'm not gonna go like too into it, but like you ever heard about the Donner Party? You know what the Donner Party was?
Vaguely, I think
The
it sounds familiar.
the Donner Party, they were a hiking party that got lost in they got lost in, I think I want to say it was the Appalachians. Um, and there's gonna be somebody listening to this who knows a lot about the Donner Parties who'll be like, absolutely not. But Sierra Nevada, they were in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and they got lost, and they were there like from 1846 to 1847. I don't have Google open, don't ask me. They were there from 1846 to 1847, and like they had to resort to cannibalism. The one, like I think
Yes.
one or two of them made it out alive, and like that got warped and twisted and whitewashed, and people were like, "It was the Wendigo," and it's like probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah. But like so now there's all these like now anytime you watch anything about the Donner Party, it is either like a really like cut and dry documentary about like this happened to them, or it's a movie about Wendigos. And
Right.
like, and that's what it is. Like,
There's really no in between.
exactly. And that's kind of like Bayou folklore's like that, right? Like, there's so much interesting. My mom is a Wiccan, like a straight up pagan. Like, has always had like a rabbit familiar, which is why I thought it was interesting when you got a rabbit. That's
I
why I
have
told you. I was like,
two
my mom's always
rabbits
had.
now too,
I know,
so
and they're wonderful. They're adorable pets.
they're
They're
something,
nothing.
all right.
Yeah, they're nothing but chaos. And then they like flop over, and you're like, I love you with all of my heart. Stop eating everything I own.
I would die
Uh,
for you, but also stop.
yeah, my mom for 30 years. Um, and that's like you grow up with all that, and like I got that side of it. Was like my mom grew up in a very rural, like the bayou. It's you hear and you see things in the bayou you can't quite explain, and it's because it's so dark and it's so old out there. Like, it's everything. So much of it is just undisturbed. We have actual dinosaurs. Like
Wow.
yeah, like anybody who doubts dinosaurs are real and they live in South Louisiana, I'm like, every now and then you have to stop and let one cross the road, and they're big and fat, and they have and they make these weird like noises, and they huff and puff, and they just
You're talking
and
about gators, right? Just to be
I am
clear, I
I am
have never been in that like area. I am so scared of alligators. I cannot even express to you because I know that I'll panic if I see one. And I've only seen crocodiles in Florida, I'm pretty sure. And I was
Mhm.
so scared. Like, I don't think I could just let them walk around me all willy-nilly.
They're all right. The thing about wild
They're all right.
alligators. No, the thing about wild alligators is that wild alligators are just big fat idiots who just like they don't want anything to do with you. They just want to eat like any all living thing because they don't want to fight for their food because they're reptiles. So they're like, look, I have this much energy for the month, and they're a mood. No, they're like, I have this much
Honestly,
energy for the yeah. They have this much energy for the month, and then I got to eat again, and I don't want to do that. So they just sit on a rock and they stare off into the distance and do nothing with their lives.
me.
They all need. They all. And like the problem is that we started building like people were like we have this lovely bayou front property and people started building these big McMansions in front of the bayou and then their dogs get eaten by alligators and it's like you should
Oh.
have put a fence. Yeah, and it's sad, but it's like you live in South Louisiana, you should have
Mm-hmm.
put a fence up. Like it's very very sad. Don't let your dog where the alligators are. um because like you choke out all this wildlife and it like we have invasive species here called nutria rats. Nutria rats are disgusting. They have
Oh.
these big orange teeth, and they were brought here by the Spanish. But like that's South Louisiana is like we have all these big, huge, crazy fauna that like the least scary of our problems is the fact that we have actual dinosaurs. The most scary of our problems is that we live between where the Rougarou exists and where voodoo exists,
Right.
and like that's where it is. And there's like a whole big stretch. There's like 400 or 500 miles of America where like that's how people are, right? Because they're living blissfully unaware that for centuries, and I'm not going to get like American history is American history. We brought people from certain parts of the world here that believed differently than us. And they stayed here because, like you can make a life here. A lot of them made a life here. A lot of them have and like tried their best against, against the historical basis of where all this comes from. Like a lot of them tried their best. Voodoo is a big vestige of that. And so voodoo, for anybody who doesn't know, voodoo is when you communicate with spirits called Loa, and the Loa will like you have to give them payment in order to like commune with them, if you will. Um, Loa are not kind. They're not malevolent or benevolent. They're self-serving, and you just have to find a way to try to balance with them. Um, a lot of people misunderstand that. We have like voodoo museums and we have voodoo shops and all that, and this is all born out of like this horrible tragic past that America has.
Yeah.
All born, like it's all born out of that, and like that's what South Louisiana is. And you grow up around all of that, and the rest of the world, you talk about this, and the rest of the world looks at you with like these glossy eyes, and they're like, that can't exist. It's like, no, it does. It does. It all happens here. And that's why I make the joke that we're the most haunted place in the United States, because like not only are we super concentrated with just like all of this old world, a lot of it hasn't changed. We don't bury our dead the proper way. Not only are we saturated with that energy, we are also saturated with a whole generation, or like generations upon generations of people who were forced to be here, who willingly communicate with self-serving otherworldly creatures. and energies and
Right.
spirits, and that is the kind of, like, life South Louisiana has brought upon itself for 400 years. And yeah,
Right.
and like that's the part of the world I'm from. And so you talk about being afraid of the alligators, and I'm like, no, no, no. I'm afraid of like what kind of afterlife that I'm gonna get thrust into if there is one, because I was here. Like
Because
just
I was
because I was here in
here.
the crossfire.
Right. No, I feel like that's a completely valid worry. So, kind of with that being said, I have to ask, have you ever had like a paranormal experience, or do you kind of want to go into the most haunted locations in Louisiana? Like, I want to know it all. I want to know it all.
So I can start with, have I ever had a paranormal experience?
Yeah.
Yes, several. Uh, and it's again, this is just like a thing happened to me that my brain couldn't comprehend, and so like this is really like the only explanation I have for it. My beliefs, the spiritual world has been like always something that like I've been aware there are people who like super believe in it, but I play aloof to the world. And so like I do this thing where like if I can't explain things, I like my brain is like, oh, there's rational, and the rest of my brain is like, leave it be, leave it be, leave it be, like because it's like we just that's over there and we're over here. Um, but when I was a kid, we used to joke all the time that the house was haunted, and come to find out, it was like, no, my mom's haunted. That's just like that. My mom makes a joke like, oh, and she's like, oh no, I'm haunted. It's me. And it's like, oh, haha. And no, like that's the thing. Now I realize she was never joking about that. She gets followed by spirits because that's the life she has lived.
Right.
So we used to joke that the house was haunted, and it was always stuff like things would just like go missing, or like things would just break. It was like, and my mom always called me a poltergeist because I was just breaking shit. No, I'm kidding. It's we, like we had poltergeists and we had like stuff like that, and it was always my mom always just like, don't worry about it, it's fine. There's nothing. My mom made a joke a couple times at me that she was the scariest thing in the house, and I'm not afraid of anybody, but I can see it. She's a little 4'10" Bayou witch, like she's yeah.
I
That's
love that for her. I would love to meet your mom, honestly. She sounds like my kind of people, not gonna lie.
Imagine Molly Weasley but Cajun, and that's my mom.
That's
She's got a
amazing.
million. She's got a million kids, and everybody loves her, and she cooks amazing, and she's a witch. And my grandmother. I'm not going to go too much into my mom's mom, because that's a whole can of worms that that's a conversation that happens on a different type of podcast.
Fair enough.
But my mom's mom practiced hoodoo, which was weird because she was a devout Christian, but she practiced hoodoo. So every time there was a storm, she would come and she would put sheets over the mirrors until she eventually got to the point where she got too big, she couldn't walk. But she would come and put sheets over the mirrors. She would salt the doorways, and she would sit there and she would pray.
Oh.
And yeah, and it was always interesting because it was always like, I don't know which faith this is, but apparently it's one of them. And so that was always the approach he took to that, was like she did her own thing and it's fine. And a lot of that is rooted in there's folklore in so many cultures that like you don't look into the mirrors during a thunderstorm. I think that I have there's so many variations of it. You never heard that?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, like so a lot of cultures, and I think voodoo, and I might be misquoting this, but voodoo, there is a deep rooted, like deep cut belief in voodoo that when the sky opens to rain, or when a thunderstorm is happening, the spirits are communicating with the physical world. Rain is a bad omen to a lot of people, and you have to think historically, when voodoo practitioners first got to Louisiana, they would have found that New Orleans, which is a bowl, and it already sits under much of Louisiana already sits under sea level, South Louisiana specifically. It would have rained hard and it flooded. And in the city, that's a bad thing because everybody's home got destroyed.
Yeah.
All of that. Your street would get under. You couldn't do anything. Like you couldn't go anywhere. You either got safe or you didn't.
Right.
And that's how it was. And New Orleans floods easily. And it's also, we have hurricanes here, which we know now. Like they knew hurricanes back then, but they didn't. Like we know now a whole lot about hurricanes. Like, oh, it's just pressure systems, etc. Back then, it would have been like, no, this was sent by something trying to punish us because we have done poorly. And so like that is a deep rooted thing. And the mirrors are supposed to be like, about Bloody Mary. Everybody knows about Bloody Mary.
Yeah.
Mirrors are supposed to be like a window into the spirit world, if you will, or into the beyond.
Right.
A lot of people believe that like the silver in a mirror can, I don't know, I can go into this all day. the end all be all of it was that it would storm really bad. My grandmother would come over. She'd cover all the mirrors. Don't look into the mirrors when it was storming, and she would pray those spirits away. And that was the thing that I grew up with, and like to me that was normal. I thought everybody's grandparents did this, and it's like no, my grandma was just in a cult. But that's again, you discuss that on a different kind of podcast.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and it that was always a thing. Like, and I've met several other people who come from like deep parts of the bayou or like different parts of Louisiana, and that's how their family was as well. However, with mine, it was always, always, always if the weather was going to get bad, Granny would come and she would cover all the windows and salt the doors. And I grew up on like an estate, if you will. There we had 11 acres of property, a big farmhouse. We had like all this land, big marshland behind us. And my cousin and I, for years, if it was raining really hard or if it was like hazy or dark or foggy, there was a figure we could see. And one time we rode dirt bikes and four-wheelers back there, and like the story that he tells now, because he remembers it better than I do, is that we got really close to where like we thought it might have been, and like there was an animal there that he didn't recognize, like eating an alligator, and like yeah, and like that's horrifying, right? Because that's the alpha predator. Like it, not that. I mean, they're dumb. They get hit by cars, but like anything that just in the marsh can just murder an alligator. Like we don't, it's like a bobcat can't do that. Bobcats are like, like 45 pounds soaking wet, if that.
Right.
How it metastasized in my head, like over time, was that there was a cryptid that lived in the backyard, right? And it whether or not I actually believed that, it's a whole different discussion. That's but that's like that is now I will joke about that until I believe it. That like no, the cryptid that lived in the backyard, on Bayou Blue, like it is what it is. That is the kind of stuff that like you just become used to because everybody's got stories like kids. So you're part of the world. I know where you're from. I've met several people from there, and like y'all talk about the typical things like, oh, there's vampires and others like like whatever, like it's it's
hey,
like
we have Wendigos. Thank you very much.
You have Wendigo. That's killer. That's I wish I had Wendigos because it's cooler. Wendigos are cooler than the Rougarou. No, the Rougarou is pretty much the Wendigo. Like it eats you and it disappears into the night.
Same concept.
But I actually have started referring to it as the Bayou Leshy because it didn't look like a Rougarou in my head. I remember like, or at least I say remember, like the way I think about it is like a tall, menacing figure with horns. And like that to me seems like a Leshy. If you know what a Leshy is?
Mm-mm.
A Leshy is like a spirit of the forest, more or less.
Oh, okay.
If you've ever played The Witcher 3, they're like the scariest thing you fight in the whole goddamn game. They call him a Leshin in that, but it's like Slavic mythology. It's like a tall beast, spirit of the forest, and this is more or less what that thing was. Like that thing was just and like for all I know, it might have even just been like a dog like a feral dog in the backyard eating a hawk or something. I don't know, but a big animal was eating another big animal, and it freaked my cousin and I out, and we rode ATVs like a mile and a half back up to the house. And we never spoke about it again, except for when we spoke about it every time we were around anybody.
Except for every time we told the story. Other than that, nothing.
And that's how folklore starts, right? And it
honestly,
I consider that a paranormal experience because like that, it was a thing. I don't remember it, but I do remember it happening, and I can't explain it. And like the best explanation I have for that as a logical person is that it was something that I could not comprehend.
Right.
So, the curious, the empathetic part of my brain is like, it's because you were never going to comprehend it. It's because it was not of this world, or something you were taught was not of this world. And then moving to New Orleans, spooky shit happens in the French Quarter after about 2 a.m. The French Quarter is the oldest neighborhood in the United States. It is literally named that because that's where the French set up. Boom. That's where Bourbon Street is. That's where Jean Lafitte's Blacksmith Shop, which is a bar that still operates now, where if you use the women's bathroom after 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning, so many women have reported that their bra broke, and so many people say it's because the ghost of Jean Lafitte likes to hang out there and snap people's bras. I don't know if that's the truth, but I do know the ghost of Jean Lafitte, if he had anywhere in the world he would live, it'd probably be here, because this is where he was all the time. Regularly, they told him that he was not ever allowed back in the governor's mansion again, and regularly he found himself at dinner with the governor of New Orleans at gunpoint. So, it is what it is. Highly haunted, like high-key haunted. And this is where I moved from like weird bayou folklore haunted to like big city, 400 years old, super haunted.
So
Like
you got the
famous.
best of both worlds, is what I'm
Yeah.
hearing.
Yeah, we're like we bury our dead in like mausoleums above the ground, and like you can hear the ghosts congregating in the the middle of the street,
Ooh.
and that's spooky, right?
Yes.
No, and like that's kind of how it is that like it people believe this, and New Orleans is famous in some for some people because like some people will tell you that some people who believe the vampires are real will tell you that vampires live here. And I've never met somebody who I could definitively say that's a vampire. But I can tell you, I've seen people who when I'm drunk at 2 o'clock, I'm like, that guy's definitely a vampire. That guy's definitely never out of the sun. That guy dresses too well and smells too good and is definitely a vampire. And it's like that. That's how that goes. And it's like, it's drunk Hayden makes these jokes, and then like like in the morning you wake up and you're like, I saw an interesting person last night who I'm never going to see again in my life, and I can believe anything I want of him. And because when my mind was at its most malleable, I went, it's a vampire. That's what I believe. Like that's just how it sticks. And that's New Orleans. And like there are people who will tell you like, no, yeah, you probably met a vampire. They were at the dungeon bar is a big one. This is the second time today I talked about the dungeon. The dungeon is a famous bar in the French Quarter. Super dark. It's where all the goths hang out, and also all the vampires, if you believe such a thing. That's where all the vampires are. And there are places in New Orleans where like tourists are afraid to go because they tell you if you're a tourist you should be afraid to go there. And in my mind, I know it's because a lot of the locals don't want tourists there. But also in my mind, living here, I know that's where the vampires are. That's how that goes.
And that's where I want to go
Yeah,
immediately.
hey, the bartenders are probably really cool. They're New Orleanians, so.
I mean, I would have to assume that they're cool. I would love, just based off what you've told me, I would love to take a trip down there someday and just like hang out. You said it's the French Quarter. That's what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hang out there. I want to meet a vampire. I'm trying to be young forever. So like, vampires, hit me up. I hate the thought of something eating an alligator, though. I've got to say, that freaked me out. I am more freaked out by cryptids than I am with spirits. Like, spirits, I'm like, okay, I'm not a fan, but I can deal with it. Cryptids, I know there's not much I can do, so, like, and especially just the thought of something eating an alligator freaks me out. So, and the thought of like putting myself in your shoes of like, riding with your cousin or whatever, and you see that and then trying to get out in the dark, and I'm already terrified of the dark because of the skinwalker and the Wendigo, but like what the hell is eating an alligator? You know what I mean? Like that's just horrifying.
Cajuns.
Did you say Cajuns?
Yeah, I've eaten alligator before. It's kind of delicious.
I'm not surprised. I've heard that it's like a not common, but like kind of common dish down there, or yeah. So I think I would try it someday.
You deep fry it and you dip it in like a horseradish sauce. It's really nice. It's like any kind of like meat. You season it, and by the time you're done, you're like, oh, this is delicious, and it's just because of how they cooked it. You can make anything taste like anything.
I mean, honestly.
Yeah, like, it is what it is. But yeah, like and it's because we have such a vivid like flora and fauna here, and because of I'm actually going to use a quote from a podcast that I like. There's a podcast called Last Podcast on the Left, and they did a whole series on Aleister Crowley. And one of the hosts says is that he dabbled in like chaos magic rituals, and he said that like whether or not you believe it, you invite these possibilities into your life that like you're more acutely aware of them, and like things just kind of go wrong sometimes, and when that goes wrong, you can connect dots in ways, and like I like that when he says that, because that's the truth, right? Is that like I live in this area where that's how it is like the paranormal is very, very talked about here, both to play up the tourism and because people believe it, like because people have lived here and it's like, oh no, all this strange stuff has happened to me all my life that doesn't happen to anybody anywhere else. Right. Clearly it's because we are so haunted, and because like chaos and magic reign here, and it's there's so many witches and there's so many like voodoo priests and people like still very active today, and you can connect dots in ways for like misfortunes or fortunes or whatever you met, like mayhaps and wheretofores in your life. You can connect those in ways that we're definitely inviting, just by being here and living here, we're definitely inviting some sort of aura into our everyday livelihoods. And
Right.
that's how it is.
Right. And I'm not like shocked about how much paranormal activity there is just based off the history that you've told me.
Mhm.
Because there's so, between the traumatic events and, you know, the magic people are dabbling in and things like that is so much energy. It'd be hard to not have some sort of haunting of a whole like city, you know,
Right.
especially with the French Quarter. You said it's the oldest city in America. Is that what you said?
It's the oldest neighborhood in America.
Oldest neighborhood in America.
Yeah,
Like that
oldest
is
neighborhood.
bound to bring some, you know, I would love to stay in the French Quarter. Now I'm all excited. Honeymoon changes. No, Josh specifically was like, cuz when we were planning, he was like, we are not going somewhere haunted. And I was like, oh, well, got to check off the Queen Mary, got to check off the Stanley Hotel, like checking off all these things, like dang, I was going to try. So
We also New Orleans or Louisiana in general is riddled with plantations,
yeah.
which plantations all obviously have pasts. They were built for the wrong reasons. They the wrong side of history occurred specifically in plantations.
Yeah.
There's a plantation here that has become a bit of a tourist destination called the Myrtles.
Yes, I know that. Yep.
Mhm.
Sorry, I got excited.
No, it's fine. The Myrtles is killer because I have never spent the night there, but I have been there. And I've been to a lot of plantations that like they dress them up as wedding venues now, you know, and it's like, it's almost as if like through the sheer power of capitalism and wedding photos, they have like driven away all of the spirituality, all of the like reverential spirituality of these places, which in a way makes them seem like tainted more, you know, like when the spirit world finally decides it's had enough, that's where it begins, is like right there in those houses. The Myrtles has been mostly untouched, and like now like that it oozes this kind of eerie, like you can tell there's something not right about the world, like it's the veil is thin there because
Yeah.
humanity pushed it and pushed it and pushed it, is how it feels. And it might be because they're playing it up, it might be because my entire life, no matter how skeptical I can pretend to have been, no matter how, like, the fact remains that these are the things I've heard my whole life, and now I'm there, and whether or not I believe it, I still am aware of that, and like that metastasizes as like, oh, I'm here. The veil is thin,
Right.
you know, and it's undeniable in that circumstance that like as you feel these things and as you like see these things and you know that you're experiencing these things, it is undeniable in those circumstances that like there's something else. The paranormal is there, and like we definitely are attuned to it. You know, and
Yeah.
places like the Myrtles and places like our cemeteries are like that too. We have like cemetery tours and ghost tours and stuff that they take you on, and some of them are really touristified. But if you get like a really good one, you learn some interesting stuff and you see some things you just kind of can't account for.
Right.
And that's the real, I can't say beauty, but that's the real like interesting thing about it. And that is like, I will never ever tell people like I 100,000% do not believe in the paranormal, because like I can't. Because I straight up, there's things in my life I can sit here and name too many times, like, oh yeah, well there was the time that this happened, there's the time that this, you know, like that's how it's always been. So like I very cautiously stand back and I'm like, ah yes, I've experienced things.
Yep, and that's what we're gonna leave it at. Yeah, for sure. I just want to like real quick touch on the wedding venue thing, and I don't care who gets offended by this. If you are getting married at a plantation, you're a disgusting human being, because that is not a place. I just think that is so, and maybe I don't know. I just think that's so like inappropriate on so many levels, and like because like there was suffering that happened there, you know, and it's. Gotta say, it's mostly the white girls who are like, oh, it's so pretty and it's rich in history. Like, girl, you don't even know. Like, come on. I don't know. That just disgusts me that people like choose, yes, this is a great place to get married, where there is this giant, like, this place of suffering. And honestly, I'm sure that doesn't, like, the spirits there, I'm sure that does not make them incredibly happy. Like, what are you doing?
Although I will say, I have been to several of them that are like black owned, you know, and like where they're like, no, like this is what, you know, like we
Right.
took it back, and like we, and like I it's not my place to comment on that.
Right.
But it is like, I mean, their community suffered for it. Their community is allowed to do as they please with it. And like,
For
if you want to run
sure.
it as like those, if you want to run it as a wedding venue, like I can't. But it's like you said, it's when these, like, you know, you get these people who like they were like rich white people their entire life, and then they,
Hmm.
I don't want to get overly political. You know what I'm trying to say.
Yes. And I didn't
But
mean to get it. Just like it upsets me that
yeah.
people don't know the history behind those places. They don't think
Hmm.
about, how their actions are going to affect it. But like honestly, like the people who are, the black owned ones and things like that, like good for them. Honestly, like
Hmm.
good for them. But
Absolutely.
Myrtle's Plantation I remember seeing on Ghost Hunters, and I'm very like in tune with the spiritual world in terms of like I can feel certain energies and things like that. I have lost my touch. I used to be able to like see things and hear things and things like that. I can't anymore because I grew up, and now
Yeah.
as an adult, like there's this weird fear that kind of holds me back too. Um,
Yeah.
but Myrtle's Plantation, when Ghost Hunters covered it, I think that's one of the episodes that scared me the most. And I fell asleep during
Hmm.
most of Ghost Hunters. It puts me to sleep like a baby. I don't know why. It's
I
specifically Ghost Hunters.
I know, it's when I'll wake up. It's when I'll wake up to a snap from you from 4 a.m. where it's just like a screenshot of Ghost Hunters on your TV, and I'm like,
It's true. It's true. Because I have to watch it to fall asleep. I had to cancel Discovery Plus recently, but which
oh,
is, I know, I was so sad. Need money for the stupid wedding. But yeah,
oh,
I literally have to watch Ghost Hunters to go to sleep. And I don't know if it's because like I used to watch it with my mom when I was a kid, so there's kind of that comfort like associated
yeah.
with it. Because it's only Ghost Adventures doesn't make me fall asleep like that. Dead Files doesn't make me fall asleep like that. It's Ghost Hunters. That is the only show that puts me to sleep like a baby. But yeah, when they did Myrtle's Plantation, I was like, I want to go there, but I also want to avoid it. Like there was just so much like energy, and I wasn't even physically there, and I was like, that place is gonna be a good episode because that place looks. I mean, it looks spooky as well, so that doesn't help. But
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
I remember that episode, and it was freaky. It was freaky, and they had some. I think a guy passed away on the front porch.
It just, there's so many like terrible stories. Like, so the biggest newest thing from New Orleans, right, is the French Quarter. There was a To give you like an idea of like just the bad mojo, right? There was a Hard Rock hotel being built here that collapsed early last year.
Oh wow.
February, March, yeah. There were two people specifically who, like, there were more deaths than this, but there were two people specifically in it who died, and their bodies, I think they finally got the second one out literally 4 months ago.
Oh no.
Yeah, and they covered for a while. They covered it with a tarp because more of it fell after 2 months. More of it fell, and you could see his legs hanging out, and like the family was like, "You said you couldn't get to it, like that's," and so like, yeah, and it's a whole bunch of just bad,
Oh
um,
no.
yeah, and it's wild, right? Because like that happened right here in the middle of the city, and like those kinds of tragedies usually, like, so there was a building that collapsed in Miami recently. I don't know if you saw that. That was national news.
Mm-mm.
National news. Bunch of very, like, nearly everyone who was in there was unaccounted for.
Oh
Um,
wow.
yeah, and like that, like, it's one of those things I tell people. I'm like, yeah, multiple people died in like a building collapse in New Orleans in the French Quarter, and people like have to Google it and be like, why did like that should have been national news.
Right.
It's kind of par for the course in the most haunted place in the United States. Like, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, but it's we were, like, for a while we were the murder capital of the United States, and for a while we were like one of the most dangerous cities, considered one of the most dangerous cities in the world. I've lived here for so long, I've never really been in any like real danger. I've
Right.
had, like, I've had like your normal, like, oh, I live in a city kind of, like I got robbed, or like I got, like, it is what it is. I've been mugged a couple times, which,
Oh
like, I
really?
say that, I say that casually, and I know that some people are like, I live in a city.
I did.
Like I
I
live.
got worried. I was like, I'll beat them up. Not actually, but because I'm weak.
Yeah,
But
like I live in a city. Like like the randomness of living in a city. Like, it, not gonna say you're more likely than not, because I know many people who like have never been mugged, but like I've been mugged a couple times. Is what it is. It is what it is. But like something about New Orleans just like invites that door between life and death kind of swings here,
right.
and like that's really how it seems like everything's a little more random and a little more tragic here than like a lot of other places. um and I think a lot of the old world is like that. It's We are very much a vestige. People make a joke, and this is probably not super like politically correct, but people make a joke that we are a third world country. And like I can almost kind of see it, because our infrastructure sucks, our roads suck. Like the there's like the super elite intelligent here, and then there are people who like the system failed them, and like
Yeah.
nothing is ever going to be done about it. um and it's a big discrepancy. It's a big discrepancy, and it New Orleans is a very very just steeped in this very like I said, this the veil between life and death is really thin. That door kind of opens and closes as it pleases here.
Right.
um and it seems like it does it a little more astutely than in other places. Astutely is probably not the word I was looking for there, but
I don't know. I didn't graduate. No, I'm just kidding.
but
Yeah.
it does seem like we're a little more concentrated in the paranormal here, and it is because the random and the tragic and the chaotic do all kind of travel hand in hand in the Big Easy.
I can
And
definitely see that because I think of like, of all, and again, I've never been to New Orleans or even Louisiana for
mhm.
that matter, but there's such rich history. And when I say rich, that doesn't necessarily mean like good, obviously, but just so much. And like you said, like chaos and, tragedies and just random tragedies and events and things like that.
Mhm.
Like when I just feel, and again, I've never even been there, but I can like feel the energy, like even just talking to you, that Louisiana kind of, it's very different. And especially with New Orleans, it's just, I don't want to say more magical because that makes it sound all like cheery and like happy and stuff, but there's definitely
It's Disney.
something uniquely magical about it. I guess I'll word it that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. No, and you're right. You're 100% right. And there's a fun. I have a fun story about my karma. If you care to hear it,
I
I
do.
don't know if I don't know if this will be the place in the show to. I can talk about it now if you want. You're
Yeah,
gonna
go
laugh
for
really
it.
hard at this. So, my mom has always taught me and my siblings that um, you have to be careful the things you put out into the universe, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
something that everybody's parents. But my mom, like, it seems like that was a lesson my mom tried really, really hard to teach all of us all the time. And like I mentioned to people that that was one of the biggest lessons my mom like tried to impart upon all of us is you have to be careful of the things you put out into the universe. Um, I am the most skeptical of her children. My older brother's pretty aloof, but there's certain things he believes that he's like, I can't really explain that, so I'm not. He's a lot like me in that, but he's a little more leaning to like, I'm not even gonna sit here and be like I'm a skeptic and don't. It's just one of those things where like I don't give a lot of thought to it, just because I'm some questions in my mind are better left unanswered, um, which sucks because I'm a super curious person. So like, there's a lot of things where I'm like I really want to know, but I don't want to know. And I'm about to tell you, I'm about to give you a good example of why I don't want to know sometimes. Uh, my sister and I are very, very close. My younger sister and I are very close. We're 4 years apart. One of my best friends in the world. A few years ago, she decided she'd never been to California. She was like, "Do you want to go to LA? Just go to." I was like, "Yeah, let's go. Let's go to LA. Why not?" We're there 2 days uh, before I make a joke. Now we were there a total of 5 days, but the second day we were there, I make a joke. And I say, "You know, this is great, but I've never experienced an earthquake, and I just think it'd be really funny if I experienced one while we were here, just to say I did." And Mia went, "Dude, shut up." The next day, we're at the Los Angeles Museum of Art because I like the Los Angeles. I had been before, and I like the Los Angeles Museum of Art, the Contemporary Museum of Art. So the LACMA is what it's called. We went to the La Brea Tar Pits, which is really the reason I wanted to go. And then she wanted to go to the museum because like I like museums. She likes museums. Like so. So we saw the tar pits, then we went inside. And while we're inside, Mia goes, "What was that?" So what are you talking about? She's like, "I don't know. It just felt." And then like she gets an alert on her phone that we had just been through the largest earthquake California had had in 20 years. And she went, "Hey, dude, you summoned an earthquake." And I was like, "No, I didn't. No, like that. No, there's no way." And she's like, "Yeah, dude, that was an earthquake." And then sure enough, I get the alert on my phone. Like there was an earthquake. Like be aware. And I was like, "Oh, all right. Oops. I didn't feel it." And I told her. So like the next day, I didn't say I didn't feel it until the next day. We meet one of my friends who lives out there and works at NBC, and we're going to dinner, and she's like, "Yeah, did y'all feel the earthquake yesterday?" And because I never learned my lesson, I was just like, "No, I didn't feel it. It sucks that I'm like the one time I'm in LA and there's an earthquake, I don't feel it." That sentence barely leaves my mouth that a second earthquake hits, and it's stronger than the one before, and I felt that shit because we were in a parking garage
Oh
and it shook.
no.
And my
No.
sister, my sister, her exact words were, "Why is it that you are the one child mom had who refuses to look too deep into any of this and is the most skeptical one, and you have the karmic power of a 3,000-year-old voodoo priest?" And I said, "I don't know."
I don't know.
That's where I summoned two earthquakes in Los Angeles in 2019. So if you're from Los Angeles listening to this, you're welcome.
You're welcome. Oh, that's horrifying.
It's
I
yeah, it's terrifying.
want to meet your mom. I
She's
look,
the coolest.
she seems so cool, but like that's why I'm so careful with when I'm practicing because I basically believe the same thing, like especially when I'm practicing witchcraft because I know I'm working with shit, pretty
Hmm.
powerful shit, and that what I put out into the world is going to come back to me. I don't strictly practice Wicca, but I do kind of believe the like rule of three. Like if you put something out or a curse or whatever, it's going to come back three times stronger, whatever the heck that is. Basically, I know, and it's kind of like to me, it's common sense. Like I'm working with energies, like energies of the universe and things like that. So obviously, like if
Right.
I'm putting a certain energy out, I'm gonna get it back or something similar to it back.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm very, very, very careful to make sure that I follow that rule, and that's why I keep all my intentions like very precise and clear. This is my intention doing this, and this is what I want out of it. And that's why I don't look down on witches who do curses and hexes and things like that. That's just not something I personally want to mess with because of my beliefs that it will come back to me and I do not need any more crap. And also I don't want to use like my magic for, I don't want to say bad because I don't want to look down on other witches who do use it because I don't think they're like bad people, but I don't personally want to use my magic for those kinds of things. You know what I mean? I want to use
Yeah.
it for good. And like, again, I don't like to use that word because like I'm not better than the next witch just because I'm not using curses. You know what I mean? But like,
Right.
I know what I want to get out of it, and that's not a risk that I'm willing to take. So,
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that like different with like at different strokes, different folks, right? Like
yeah.
different. My mom, or not my mom, my sister has made a joke before, like different stitches for different witches, right? Uh, and it and another one that she's really fond of that she said in front of my mom, and my mom loved this one is different witches or different bitches, and that one's really popular in my family, but um my mom just kind of knows things that I can't explain, and that's like been my biggest thing. The biggest thing that has kept me a skeptic and not like a like flat out non-believer is that my mom has just always known things that I just could never explain how she knew them. Um, the way we found out, the way my mom found out she was pregnant for me, is my great grandmother, who just had visions. The same mama I was talking about before.
With
Uh,
the mirrors and the storms, that grandmother.
no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, not that grandma. Her mom. Her mom.
Oh,
Um,
sorry.
yeah. No, 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 no. I'm sorry because I misled you. My mama. The way my mom found out she was pregnant for me is my mama looked at her one day, in June of 1990. No, it would have been, yeah. No, it would have been. I'm sorry. It would have been May. May of 1990. Looked at her and said, "Boy, end of the year. And my mom went, what? My mom went, it's a boy. It's at the end. He's going to come at the end of the year. And my mom was like, what are you talking about? And sure enough, 2 months later, she found out she was pregnant. 2 months before my, like literally, and like when my mama had said it to her, like my mom, like would have just been getting pregnant, like before a pregnancy test even would have caught it back in 1990, or like was about to become pregnant. Now, the funny thing about that is if anybody's following, if you do the math on it, that's only 7 months. I was 2 months premature. So when my mom was like, well, maybe it's a fluke, maybe she just knew or like guessed or whatever, because they were like, my mom and dad were like deciding on another kid. They weren't necessarily trying. I wasn't necessarily an accident. Like they were going to have another kid. They were just deciding if the time was right. But anybody who's doing the math, that's 7. I was 2 months premature, which means that my grandmother was so good at predicting this and like just knew that she knew I was going to be a boy and she knew I was going to be early because it looked like I was going to be a girl until literally the last month I was born. I was going to be named Hannah Nicholson, and now I am Hayden Nicholson.
Hannah.
I know, right?
I
I know,
love
right? And
it.
that's yeah, me too. But that like that's how my mom found out she was pregnant for me, and I tell that story because that's how we found out, or that's how my sister found out she was pregnant as well. Because my sister came over one day, and my mom just had a feeling, and she looked at her and said, like my older sister, she looked at her and said, "When are you due?" What? My
Wow.
mom, when are you due? And Jenna's like, what are you talking about? And sure enough, not even a month later, Jenna was like, holy shit, I'm pregnant.
Wow.
How did she know? My mom just knows that she just knows. She just knows things. I recently had my appendix out, and I didn't like. I had just like it slipped my mind to text my mom, and they brought me into the room the next morning, and I at no point had called her or texted her or told anybody in my family. I think the only people who knew were like Jackie and Battle Meow, who knew because I was on a voice call with her when I decided I was going to go to the hospital. So I was getting my appendix out, and didn't tell my mom. And I thought I called my mom, and I was going to tell her like, hey mom, I'm in this hospital. And when she picked up the phone, she said, hey, we're going to be there in an hour. We just have to be ready. And I said, I didn't tell you what was going on. And she said, you don't have to. I know. Can never explain how she knew that.
I just got chills
Just gonna
from
let yep,
that.
just gonna let it roll. And sure enough, they showed up. They, like she knew what room I was in. Like she found out what room I was in. She knew what hospital I was at. It was wild. And I don't want to know how she knew, and I don't want to know. I never want to know when she knows things like that. I'm like, cool, she knows. It's fine. It's cool. It's whatever. And
Right.
like that, don't want to know. like
Wow.
yeah, it's insane, and it very, very, very like it. My mom's a powerful. She is a powerful lady, and like that is, I don't doubt her anymore. When she just knows things, she knows things, and
Mm-hmm.
that.
God, I
Mm-hmm.
want to be like your mom. I know I've never met her, but oh my god, she is just like the witch I want to be. That is so cool. I used to have like when I was little, I would have these little psychic moments, if you will. Like I knew my mom was pregnant because I went up to her and I put my hand on her tummy. I said, "Baby sissy." This is according to my mom. I don't remember this.
Mm-hmm.
A couple weeks later, she found out she's pregnant. And
Wow.
then, yeah. And then when my great grandma passed away, I was very little. I had come out with a cross, I guess. Again, I have no memory of this. This is all from my mom. I had come
Wow.
out into the living room with a cross before I knew that my great grandma had passed. And I like my mom was crying, obviously, like that was her grandma. And
Mm-hmm.
I handed her the cross and said, "This is from great grandma or Grandma Ramon." That was her name.
Ooh,
And
Grandma remote.
yes, and I don't remember this, but my mom like tells me these stories, and I don't have any reason to think she would lie to me about something like that. You know what I mean? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, but as I got older, I kind of lost touch with that side of myself because it scared me, and I put up a wall, and I had a couple really horrifying paranormal experiences that I said I'm done. I don't want to be open to this. I don't want this, so I shut it down, and now I don't know how to like open myself back up to it safely. Let me just be clear, safely, because I don't just want like any Joe Schmo coming up in here and being like, hello, like I'm not okay with that. And I've just recently made headway with working with Dionysus. Had a couple experiences during stream today that I was like, okay, it's kind of hard for me to push that one away. So,
I do love that you chose Dionysus, because Dionysus is the coolest.
I love him so much. Like, I don't even care that I'm saying that about a god, because he doesn't care, because he's so chill. I love him.
And this is a vast misunderstanding of him, but I do love that he is the closest we're gonna get to the god of tits and wine.
I mean, honestly.
I love that.
Oh, me too. Well, I have learned a lot today. We are coming up on the hour mark. I try to keep these. Hello. Sorry, my rabbit just jumped between my feet.
Oh Lord.
I've learned a lot today, and I appreciate you, coming on here and chit-chatting with me about Louisiana and New Orleans. It was very fascinating. I'm going to be traumatized by that alligator story for probably the rest of my life, so thanks for that.
Yeah, how do you think I feel? I watched a cryptid eat an alligator.
You know what? Fair enough. You've got one up on me. Do you want to tell the fine people where they can find you?
You can find me in New Orleans, Louisiana. No, I'm kidding. You can find me. I'm everywhere. I'm pretty much everywhere as tinyvikinghrn. Everywhere I want you to find me, I'm there as tinyvikinghrn. Instagram, Twitter, Twitch. I do hot boy shit. So yeah.
He does.
That's what I do.
And I will be selling his address for $20. No, I'm just kidding.
Joke's on y'all. Come to my house.
Come to my house and throw a party.
Yeah, my Stranger Things pop vinyl.
I will also be linking Vikings information down below. Please be sure to go check him out. Super entertaining, super fun to watch. One of my best friends, love him to death. So please be sure to go check him out. All the love to you. I think other than that, like that's about all I have. So everyone, please remember to stay spooky.